Hey everyone, I'm Larry Walsh at Channelnomics, and this is Changing Channels. One of the things that we encounter a lot at Channelnomics is the need for data. We pride ourselves in not just consulting, but doing evidence-based strategy and program development. And evidence comes in the form of data. Now, everybody thinks about data a little bit differently, but nobody doubts the necessity of it. In fact, as management guru Edward Deming once said, is that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And nobody wants to make decisions based purely on opinion. But in the channel, data is a bit more challenging. Data is coming from multiple sources. It involves multiple different parties, both internally and externally, in order to get to that set that allows you to actually do the measures and the analysis that you need and to make informed decisions about program development and program adjustments. Now, there's a person I've known for a long time that I consider to be second to none when it comes to doing channel data analytics and decision making. This is a person who is absolutely fastidious in drilling into the numbers, not just to see what they mean, but to make sure that they are accurate, that they have a real reflection about what's happening in the field with partners, with sales, and with their own teams. His name is Bill Rainey. He is the vice president of global channels at Milestone Systems, a video management systems vendor. And he has some tremendous insights on what it means to gather data, ensure its integrity, and then do the analytics to make sure that you have a ripe understanding about what the channel is doing, how it's performing, and how to use data to make informed decisions. So join me with this really what I consider to be a really fascinating conversation about channel data management with our friend, Bill Rainey. This is Changing Channels. I'm Larry Walsh. Let's get into it. So Bill Rainey, welcome to Changing Channels.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
So, as I said in the introduction, you and I have worked together in a number of capacities over the years. And I mean it when I say that one of the things I admire you for, and you also infuriate me with, is how detailed you are on looking at the data to both identify issues and validate solutions. Why is, I'd like to hear from you directly though, is that why do you consider that to be an important thing for a person in your position?
It's a good question, Larry. By the way, I appreciate you pushing me when it comes to some of this also. I use the partner customer data very important because I like to make data to drive my decisions. It's not going to be the only item because gut feel, but you need data-driven decisions on it. So that's how I look at it. So when you ask about it I like to make sure I understand the data to know where it comes from and whether or not I can trust it. And then the data itself helps me just really understand who are our committed partners, what products are selling. It really identifies risk early if you take a look at it, and it drives the growth because I use the data to identify where I should prioritize and which partners, as I said earlier, are committed.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I often see is that when people like you in your position, and even people like me, we look at sales data and we say, okay, we can see how partners are doing in the aggregate. It's often that doesn't tell the whole story. And you and I have done this many times, is drilled into the numbers, actually try to actually see, what's actually happening with partners on an individual level or a small cohort. How does that deep inspection change your perceptions? How does it separate, perception from reality about what's happening on the ground to inform your decision making?
Maybe I had this just happen to me this week where there was a partner I thought was a very strong partner, and everyone talks about how committed they are, how good of a partner they are. But then as I took a look at their data, I saw that there wasn't a lot of new business that was being created. It was a lot of renewals and additions to it. And it just didn't seem like they were really supporting the brand. They weren't growing the business. And it's sort of, you said that reality versus what people have that get sentimental about certain types of partners and trends. What I find is by looking at the data itself and take the name out of it and the history, you get a better understanding again of just how strong or how really important that partner is for the business. Is it growing? Is it meeting the objectives we have for that partner? And I usually compare that against business planning KPIs. And if they're not meeting the KPIs, then I identify potential risk.
All right, let's talk about that risk factor because it's often I find that risk exposures, particularly when doing this type of analysis, it's more that the focus is more along of, well, where do we set thresholds? How do we identify places where the partner is going to grow, and then as a result of that, you're also going to see your revenue grow. But there's not a lot of thought, or at least a lot of attention paid to, well, what's the downside? Where are the triggers? Where do you find that risk in the data? Where do you see it?
Well, and I want to clarify something. I also identify where partners are doing better than some people think they are. Again, that's really important to see those that are exceeding, where you have some partners being told that they are supporting, and you take a look and they are growing, especially in our strategic areas. But when you're talking about thresholds, I look at thresholds about where we have requirements for different tiers that give additional benefits for supporting the brand. It's important we take a look at the risk could be that we have the thresholds too high for a particular country. It might be not the growth in that country might be as strong or as high as it is in other countries. So we always have to look at where the numbers are against where the growth, what the analysts are telling us. And so we may have to adjust the thresholds up or down, but it's always to drive the growth, make sure we identify those partners that are really supporting the brand. But we don't want to make it unrealistic. It's to make sure that we identify those partners that are really deserves not just the benefits, but the recognition, so our customers know that they're the committed partners, as I've mentioned before.
Yeah. I find though that this exercise is often hampered by the quality of the data, and is I it's a bit of a joke, but it's also reality, right? Is that for an industry like ours, and it doesn't matter, Milestone does video management, it's collecting a lot of visual data, but it's still data.
Yes.
We are in the business of creating data, of processing and refining it and analyzing it and storing it and then reporting on it. And yet, one of the things that often gets overlooked is the quality of the data. Is it right? What's the telltale signs to you when you're looking at a spreadsheet or a report or some pane of glass? That's, what's the telltale signs to you that says, okay, this may not be the right thing we're looking at. There's something missing or there's something wrong here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing is you cannot rely on the data 100% because the data will always have some quality issues in it. Much of the data is inputted by people who are doing it, like our salespeople who may be putting information in that may be quite outdated. We may have fragmented systems which conflict with each other. So you may not have the right salespeople or the right contacts that are within that partner. And one of the big issues that I run into is the definition for the data. And I'm looking at sales numbers. You can have MSRP, so list price, versus those that are invoiced to the reseller. If there's a distributor involved, what is the price that's invoiced to the distributor? Then you've got all the benefits. Does it include the worst case scenario with the benefits there? So you could have somebody comparing different definitions for those numbers, which won't be the same, as well as one might be in euros, another one might be in dollars or in another currency. So you always have to make sure you review and understand what the data is so that when you see the reports or the results, you can make a fair assessment of it.
Yeah. Just hearing you say this, and as we're walking through this process or walking through how this gets done, I'm reminded about how tedious this is. This is time consuming, and it takes a lot of attention to detail. And having worked with you and your team, I know this is one of the things you do very well, but it does take a lot of effort. And this is and takes effort in an environment which is often in a pressure cooker where people want answers yesterday. They don't want to wait a day, a week, a month to go through the distillation of data and the analysis that comes with it. How do you balance the need for immediacy of information versus the need to get it right?
Well, luckily with Milestone, we do have good data. And it's been years of cleanup, have merger and acquisitions. It's a constant, never-ending battle. But the key is to really make sure you have a good report that has filters on it allows you to address some of the issues I was talking about earlier, which is always have a dashboard, some type of business intelligence report that you can change the currency, but make sure it all collects the same and you understand what that was. The different types of data, as I said, from the different invoicing or level of detail that you need. I think it's very important to really understand that you've got the right hierarchy of accounts. So if you have an account that has multiple locations in a country, you understand that you can roll all that up to a country level or a global level. So we have business intelligence reports that can give it to you on demand, and other ones that are unique to maybe what I need for a channel partner program. I will take those reports and run my own lookup tables and my own Excel spreadsheets, and I'll merge those together and just get those what I need directly. But everything I do, I confirm with the sales teams, the finance people, also with our business intelligence team, just to make sure if I'm creating my own reports, have I missed something? Does this look right? Because there's a lot of stories behind every assumption you make.
Well, there's also a lot of bias that goes in these conversations as well. So, and again, I'm not pointing to anyone in particular when I say this, but I have been in situations where you go in and the data will tell a story that is contrary to the conventional wisdom or the beliefs going into the conversation. Or worse, I've actually been in this situation where you walk into the room where data's already been presented and you have a new data that contradicts it, but they don't want to hear it. How do you use the data to actually change hearts and minds? Is that the effective tool, or is it something else that gets layered on top of it?
Well, I've had anecdotes for everything, Larry, as you know. One of the things is don't confuse me with facts, because what the data is are facts, but they can be interpreted in different ways. So we put together a sounding board, which represent sales, operations, IT, finance, legal. And from that sounding board, when we do get something that's an anomaly, looks a little bit different than what we thought, we'll check with that sounding board, the subject matter experts around the world, get that information. So when I do come into an audience that may have a little bit of content bias, can address it with feedback or facts from other, subject matter experts they respect. And then that way they'll listen and we can discuss it. And sometimes they'll make a difference. Other times realize that maybe the data is wrong, or they will look at the data. But it always helps to make sure we have data plus the SMEs are working with that, whatever that subject matter is, so they can give some narrative.
It's interesting you bring that up, is that sometimes even at that stage, is that, and like I've been there as well, is that you try to be as meticulous as possible. You create the data set, you go through the analysis, you present it as best you can, and there may be a chance that it could be wrong, or there could be some anomalies or inaccuracies. How do you account for that when you've already been in the room and presented it? How do you maintain credibility with people who don't, particularly those that don't want to hear the numbers?
Myself, what I do is I don't try to wing it, as some people say. If I can't answer with the data that I have, I document exactly what the comments are and then set up another meeting, another gathering, so I can validate or verify. Because again, don't confuse me with data. It could turn out that somebody else is using a different number source, or using a reseller invoice instead of a distributor invoice. They're not taking certain things into account. So sometimes you have to go back. It's not important to get the answer right away. To me, it's important to understand and get the right answer. So many times I will answer what I can, we'll close what we can, whatever not, we'll have action items to address and close it off quickly. But it's best to do, have all the information to make that decision, if that's covering your question.
Yeah. No, and I think it's important that you're right, is that preparation is key here, particularly where you're trying to influence decision making, right? What is it? So the distillation of the data is one thing, the analysis of it is another. The presentation requires a lot too. So do you find yourself presenting data? Or are you presenting data? Does data always have to come up, that analysis always have to come with some recommended action item or something that you want them to take action on, more than just informing it?
Well, I guess usually when I present, I'm using data to reinforce or support what it is I'm presenting. So many times what I'm doing is I'm presenting, like recently presenting a summary of the results, the KPIs. The KPIs are just one point of it. What we're doing is we're saying, what were the objectives of the program? What were the key KPIs that we're trying to achieve? then we can give the number to say how we're performing against those KPIs. But what's more importantly than the number is understanding enough so you can explain why you're above or below. So it's always important to know the story, the narrative for each of those KPIs, and then be able to explain it and know your audience. So, explaining it to sales, to marketing, finance, operations, and each one will have a take on the result or the KPI. I need to make sure they understand I've spoken to their subject matter experts, who they are, their trusted advisors, so they can accept the information easier than if they were trying to challenge it.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking about that, thinking about visualizing you in a room with a bunch of the stakeholders, and you're all looking at the same number. And I'm reminded about what Edward Deming said, is that without data, you're just another person with an opinion.
Right.
So how do you reconcile those different points of view where you may be looking at the same number, but coming to a different conclusion?
It's just always understanding, again, the audience. Going into a meeting like that, just understand what it's important to them. Some areas it's about growth. Other people are about savings. You can have some conflict on that. So you need to balance the fact that we're growing the business, and then you use the numbers as you want to prove that you may be sacrificing some margin, but you're getting the growth, the whole equation. But you address those people who are looking at each of their areas, and especially the risk factor is if using other data to show if we gone another direction, we could have not grown as much, or the overall cost could have been more, both in margins as well as possibly market share.
One of the things I often advocate for when doing that type of measuring, like taking the KPIs and taking the sales performance data, is measuring yourself against yourself. Meaning that so you started at one point, you ended at a different point. How well did you do against your objectives and your plans? But there are also others that are pervasive in wanting to compare outside. And I find this problematic sometimes, because if you're using third-party data, benchmarking data, the accuracy can vary wildly. There's also the issue of data that you're getting from your partners. If they're self-reporting, then that can often be subjective. How much of this plays into shaping that narrative that you're talking about? Because you're trying to demonstrate that you did something positively, or you're trying to explain why something's happening. How does the infusion of other sources impact all of this?
There's a lot in what you assessed, Larry, which I enjoy working.
I mean, we can unpack it. Yeah, sure.
But let me sort of address, first off, we use third-party data, internal, using both third-party industry data, consultants to give us the data, and not always do they match. What's really important is knowing your model. We're never trying to copy. We have our own strategy. We do our own direction. It's important to understand the growth of a market, but realizing that we're constantly trying to be different, have our own unique differentiators. You can't compare ourselves with anyone else, and no company can. They can direct it, but they can see where the trends are. So for industry data, we take a look at the trends and what's selling and where there's growth. And that's probably where we want to do a little bit of prioritization. But just like a pipeline, there's going to be areas that are growing at a different rate that we look at to say, well, maybe we should put some investment funds in that area because we see that that's something that could be growth in the near future. So we take that for the industry, and then again, talk a lot with our subject matter experts and get that information in when we discuss it to support our assumptions, which is this is the product line that should be sold in this market, and another market maybe something else should be focused on, or maybe a different type of customer base. But all of that is based upon take as much of the data you can, confirm it, understand it, and then you make your assumptions based upon it. But a lot of it, like you said, is still what you know from your experience as well as from all of your trusted advisors, which to me is our sounding board and our subject matter experts.
The idea, though, that you have to have data to tell a story. You have to have data to validate positions or invalidate positions. I like to classify partner performance or partner program performance into 3 levels. One is the imperative data, the things that absolutely matter, the things that everybody cares about. And then what we call adjacent data, which is the things that you and your team measure that contributes to those imperatives but may not be of interest to the people who need to consume it. And then Below all that is the things we call feel facts, which are things that look and make us feel good, but they don't necessarily mean anything. But a lot of people do tend to get fixated on those feel facts, those feel good type of metrics. How do you ensure, because look, this is a big part of your job, is ensuring people are focused on the right things. How do you make sure that they don't drift off to those things that they think matter but really don't have any material impact?
Well, for every program we have, we always start off with why are we doing it? So that's really to align with the corporate strategy and what our direction is and how do we support that. So that's giving us our corner flags or our guardrails. Then there's the objectives that we have for the program itself, which is that middle level I think you're explaining, which is growth, profitability, movement, different ones that could be there. Then down below are the ones that I have my program leads come up with, which is what is it that they have that could be on a quarterly basis. It could be something that's based upon a region that's achievable so that if this is what you're getting at, Larry, is that they can deliver a growth in that one market I mentioned about. It could be one that a particular tier just hit a particular mark that we will use as recognition within the team. We'll use it as sharing with our stakeholders and promote as much as possible. So those are the ones I let the program leads for each of the sub projects down below to identify, to track themselves and make sure that they're achieving those along with the larger KPIs, which are the overall program KPIs.
Do you find that there's a need, or is it a good best practice to, if you're presenting using the data, the performance data to inform decision making, you make a recommendation, it looks good on paper, but is it better to test it first, to go through some period of just trying it out before it goes into full implementation? Or do you find that it's, if the data says it's good enough justification to move forward on a new program or a new initiative?
Pausing for a moment, because that's a very good question. I would like to test everything, pilot everything, because again, it's just data. The data gives the team information, make decisions. If we could do a pilot, we will. Most cases you can't. You just don't have the ability because of systems supporting it, people, resources. So we make a decision and we know that we can always adjust it. If it's not working, that's why we'll always have the KPIs and a plan for it, contingency planning. But most cases, the pilots can be done in certain parts, but with systems and the way it is today, it makes it much more difficult, especially when you're trying to be consistent for everyone. So a lot of times we will spend a lot of time testing with people, with their experts. And once it's been signed off, we will launch it, make adjustments if we need to, because if it's not working, we will always make adjustments to address any issues once it gets launched, if it's not a pilot.
Let's close on this question because I think it's important. We've talked about the good things and the best practices, and I'll tell everyone is that if you want to bounce an idea about how to do this type of analytics, talk to Bill. He really does know what he's talking about. But what do you see as the mistakes that are made? What are the things that people do wrong when they're either analyzing channel data or they're presenting it?
Well, number one is that I won't say it's wrong, but the thing I notice is that they all make decisions based on without having a common language of what the numbers mean. So you could get people having different conclusions because they're looking at the information differently. They don't understand what's behind the data. So that's the number one part that I always ask about. And then the other one is that it's that content bias. It's somebody who remembers this is how it's always been done without recognizing that, especially today in 2025, things change there so quickly, from cloud analytics in our industry, VSAS. These are things that are making a big change that we need to recognize and ensure that we're addressing it with our core business.
Very good. One last question, Bill, is somebody gets a job like yours and they call you up and they ask you for advice on, what to do or how to approach this, what everyone has, which is a mountain of data. Some of it is in one place, some of it is disaggregated. What advice do you give them on starting this journey?
I mean, the best advice I give on any of it is, as I started, why are you doing it? How do you measure success? What is your definition of success? So what is the outcome that would be important to you? And then use that as your basis throughout the entire program to always go back on your results and go back to say, have you focused on these main requirements, the main objectives, and are you meeting your objectives? And then on that, when they talk me further, I just ask them a number of questions. Like, try not to give any advice because I don't know their business as well as they do. But the fundamentals shouldn't be the difference. It's you're going after a outcome because of some strategic change in the company, and you should always have that documented and use that as a review on a regular basis.
Very good. Bill Rainey of Milestone Systems, thank you for joining us here on Changing Channels.
Thank you very much, Larry. Pleasure.
Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Changing Channels. Again, I want to thank our friend Bill Rainey, the Vice President of Global Channels at Milestone Systems, for joining us. Again, I want to thank all of you for joining us here on Changing Channels. We do this podcast to share experiences and insights with everyone to help make the channel a little bit better. We also do a lot of research and best practices publishing at Channelnomics. So I encourage you, please come over, take a look at all the great materials that we have that helps inform and build better channel operations and channel performance. And of course, I invite you to check out our other podcasts, In the Margins and The Network Effect, for even more insights. Until next time, I'm Larry Walsh.